reality, according to the Buddhist Atomism that I'm talking about today. You should remove the idea of the word atom from your mind and start over with today's talk. We're used to thinking of the word atom as how scientists have told us what atoms are, meaning that they're these little composite bodies with, a nucleus and some weird things, cloudy things outside of them. Just forget that completely. That's a very new development. Using the word atom in that way is a new development, started around 1900, but the word atom goes way back, spans many different cultures, and I'll be using the word atom in its traditional sense, where the word atom means basic building block, a partless item that makes up everything. We all know that. We've been told, 6th grade or whatever, that reality is composed of tiny building blocks. These building blocks make up everything, and they are sometimes we're told that they're partless, such as, for example, with an electron. I'm using the word atom in that sense. So for today's talk, an atom is an electron, not an atom is not a constituent, or doesn't have a constituent that is an electron. So a quark, an atom, anything that's partless and therefore irreducible is responsible for being a basic piece of ultimate reality. That's what we mean by atom. So, again, that's our picture right there. You'll see in a moment the significance of why I have this film that I've made up here. Okay, so Buddhism is unlike any other philosophy or religion. I'm in fact not sure why it's called either a philosophy or religion. In today's talk you'll see that Buddhism is an empirical study, and I'll just equate it with quantum physics. And therefore, Buddhism is a scientific pursuit, not primarily a philosophic or religious one. Okay, we've all been told that reality is composed of basic building blocks, the ones I just talked about. Tiny items that are so small that we can't see them. So, for example, if I cut up this lectern here, I can cut the pieces up so they become so small that pretty quick the pieces, you can deduce that the pieces of the electron are so small that you can't see them. So the electron is made up of items that are invisible to your naked eye. Okay, so you can keep cutting and cutting and cutting. And, then you ask the question, can we keep cutting forever? Or is there an ultimate piece that can't be cut anymore? If the answer is that there's an ultimate piece, that means that, for example, this lectern or anything else is composed of an ultimate basic building block. Okay, so the group of scientists that are responsible for studying these are called quantum physicists. You should not be intimidated by that phrase. It's just a label referred to the people that study basic building blocks. Okay, it's a very simple idea. Don't let terms scare you. But you may be surprised if I tell you that these were not first discovered by quantum physicists. As far as I can tell from my analysis of the history of culture and philosophy and so forth, it appears that a group of Buddhists in India around 400, 500, 600, 700 AD were responsible for first discovering quantum reality. So let me give you a quote here from a very famous Buddhist scholar. I think his name's pronounced different ways depending on who you're talking to, but Blavatsky. He is a very famous European, and he's very famous in Europe and Russia and America, but also India for his work in outlining what's called pre-classical Buddhism. And here's a quote that he gives us from his famous works called Buddhist Logic. The Buddhists denied the existence of substantial matter altogether. Movement consists for them of moments. It is a staccato movement, momentary flashes of a stream of energy. Everything is evanescent, says the Buddhist, because there is no stuff. That's from, I said I wouldn't cite, but here you go. His book, Buddhist Logic, Volume 1, 1962, page 19. So the point here then is, how many of you think this is moving? Doesn't it seem to be going like this? There is no motion in that film right there. That film right there. What is happening is you have pieces of light, on the film screen coming in and out of existence on the film screen, which gives the illusion of motion. Here's another example. Okay, here the film starts. See how every moment is still, and then bam. So the first moments you can tell, the first set of frames you can tell are still. The later moments that start right now are the same moments, just sped up. So you can see in this film right here, where there is stillness, now you can see stillness, but then eventually you'll have the illusion of motion right there. Okay, so that is what is being discussed in this quote that I just read. That is, for the Buddhist, all of reality. And I will argue, probably not in much detail today, but elsewhere I have that's what quantum reality is all about also. Okay, so in Strabatsky's quote, several issues are of interest. There is no matter, there is no persistence, no continuation of anything through time, and reality is energy. And also, if I would have continued the quote, we would know that reality is atomic, composed of the basic building blocks that I just mentioned. We will see today that this is in stark agreement with what quantum physicists have discovered, and for that reason, Buddhism and Buddhist Atomism may be scientific, therefore not metaphysical pursuits as are often labeled in American culture at least. If so, most interestingly of all, Nirvana, which is the direct experience of quantum reality. Yes, I did say that right. That will surprise some people. Nirvana is not a philosophy primarily, but a science, an empirical study. For that reason, I won't use the word nirvana today. I'll use the phrase Nirvanic empiricism. I'll talk about Nirvanic observers being in a state of Nirvanic empiricism, for example. Quantum reality, again, for those of you who aren't familiar, that again is the ultimate fundamental level of everything. Where these atoms, basic building blocks, well, I'll call them Buddhist atoms here in a second, they make up everything, and when we refer to quantum reality, we just mean that domain of nature. So, if you could cut apart the lectern enough, you'd run into these things eventually. Quantum reality can be experienced indirectly by physicists in the lab, as we all know. Okay? But little known in Western culture, there's another way to experience quantum reality, and that is through Buddhist meditation, often called mindfulness. There's many names, many different variations of Buddhist meditation. But the experience of quantum reality is only fully nirvanic. It is only fully nirvanic empiricism in Buddhist mindfulness meditation. So, calling this empirical probably will make some people scratch their heads. But I use the word empirical, not necessarily in the way that is largely used in our culture. In our culture, the word empirical typically means experience of something outside oneself. So the blackness of the screen here is empirical to me. It is outside me, and I apprehend it with my senses. But if I close my eyes and imagine it now, I'm told by most empiricists in philosophy today that it's not empirical. I find that odd. I find that odd for two reasons. First of all, because I'm not just thinking about the same wall that I was just looking at a second ago. So why can't I call that empirical experience? Just because it derives only from my mind seems that I should call it empirical. And another reason that it's strange is because if I look at the wall here, say, or look at the blackness on the screen, all that's going on in the traditional scientific picture is the light enters my eyes and triggers my nervous system to create a map inside me of reality. So we go throughout our lives looking at reality by constructing maps of reality in our minds. So really, in a sense, everything is inner. All of our experience of reality is just trapped and wound up in our own consciousness. This has been avoided in Western philosophy for a long time, except for a few philosophers such as William James in his philosophy of radical empiricism, where you take as being empirical anything that appears in consciousness. Whether you close your eyes and imagine a blue dragon, or open your eyes and look at the blackness on the screen there, both are just pieces of experience, so both are just considered empirical. Okay, so there's a lot more I could say about that, but I think I'm just going to keep going because I want to make sure I do what I need to do here today. Okay, so we will study, I'm going to hereafter refer to the quantum reality and the basic building blocks that I'm referring to as Buddhist atoms or as abstract atoms. I'm just going to use those interchangeably, and you'll see why here pretty quick. And we need to thoroughly explore that to get a handle on what the point is of all this discussion of Buddhist atomism. And you'll see that this leads to enormous implications for all of our lives, especially, believe it or not, for our social lives and how we live together as people. Buddhist atomism leads to social activism, in addition to things like Nirvanic empiricism and so forth. So I'll cover as much of that as I've got a lot of time, so great. I'll cover as much as I can. Okay, Buddhist atomism is reductionistic. That means that if I hold up a pen, the pen really, in a sense, doesn't exist. What exists are atoms, whether you can see them or not. The Buddhist atoms that I'm talking about, the ultimate constituents of reality. The fact that you can't see them is a problem with you, not with the pen. It's a problem with your perception being not crude enough to see reality as reality really is. And if you doubt this position, all you need to do is consult the quantum physicists, and they will tell you, well, yes, it is, if we do tear apart this pen enough, we will find something that sounds a lot like the Buddhist atomisms that Jeff is here talking about. That sounds a lot like the Buddhist atomisms that Jeff is here talking about. So we have this dilemma, as we'll see in a moment, because the pen and the atoms that allegedly make it up, there's some conflicts between the two. It's not clear how they both can coexist. In other words, it's not clear how the atoms can make up the pen, how the Buddhist atoms can make up the pen. Okay, now a traditional picture of, here we go. Traditional picture of that we're given in philosophy, so anywhere in really in Western thought, is something like this. And I just made this. I couldn't find the diagram I really wanted that I made before, so I just whipped this out, so sorry for the crudeness. We're told that there are the basic building blocks that I've told you about, which I'm calling Buddhist atoms, so electrons, quarks, and so forth. This leads to the overall field of physics, where physics leads to chemistry, chemistry leads to biology, and then out of biology emerge other things like economics, minds, societies, planets, galaxies, whatever you want to think. And chemistry also, can give rise to its own. I forgot to put another arrow over there, where this can give rise to what are called middle order solids, or middle order items, like a pen or a planet, or so forth and so forth. That's the way philosophers refer to them. However, here's what Buddhist atomism does. It goes like this. It cuts that right there. That is what I mean by reductionism. Okay, it's not clear what the connection is from here to here. The ultimate Buddhist atomic building blocks, it's not clear how they are building blocks, how they build anything. And in fact, as we'll see, what the Buddhist does in the era that I'm going to discuss in a minute is maintains that these here are largely constructions of consciousness. And this is what really exists. Those are the ultimate and real items. So if you see reality and it looks like this, you're dreaming. But if you see reality and it looks like that, you're seeing something real. That would be the picture of reality according to Buddhist atomism. Okay, so Now, to understand all this, so that's basically a quick and easy way to describe reductionism. So it's important to understand, though, that in the Buddhist philosophy that I'm referring to, we can consider reality as having we can look at reality from two different ways. Reality, to put it crudely, has two different divisions. Okay? And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. There's a division here which I'm going to call Div 2, short for Division 2. And that is ordinary empirical mental experience. In other words, all this stuff up here. Everything from here up, where physics does not include the true Buddhist atoms, electrons, and so forth. Because those are, as far as I know, not empirical. They're indirectly empirical. Nobody's ever seen a quark, seen an electron, except people that are familiar with Buddhist mindfulness meditation. Okay, so when a physicist sees a Buddhist atom in the lab, they are seeing the computer's representation of what the computer interprets is going on in the lab. Okay, so actually I have another film of that also. Can't believe I forgot. Here's another film of Buddhist atomism, but I don't think that I need to worry about that one. Sorry, I forgot about this one. Here's, as far as I understand, there you go. That's what physicists see. One example in the lab. Flashes of light. Largely motionless. And there's a lot that physicists have to do to interpret exactly what is going on, that these are particles and so forth, seen in the accelerator experimentation that they do in their labs. So, maybe I want to get back to that other film. Yeah, here we go. In case I need it later. Okay, so we're saying then that consciousness constructs biology. This moment here is largely constructed by consciousness. I'll argue this point as I have elsewhere, but we'll argue this in some mild form here today. So the other division of reality, I'm going to call Div 1, short for Division 1, is just the Buddhist atoms, which are immaterial. That could surprise some people that I put that up there. Point particles. So I'm adding some things to the idea of Buddhist atomism here that I haven't brought up yet. The Buddhist atoms are non-physical. Immaterial is a better word. And they are points. A point means it doesn't have any size. If something is point size, it has no size. Yeah?
This is like a sort of string theory.
Strings do have a one-dimensional or two-dimensional size in string theory. Yeah, I've actually argued in an article coming out later this year in a journal called Axiomathes that string theory, to have these irreducible strings, there's some problems that need to be sorted out with that, as I think string theorists will admit. But the point particle, now a string doesn't have, as far as I know, doesn't have a surface, because it's a one-dimensional line. So a one-dimensional line doesn't have any thickness, if you look at it from the side, or look at its end cap. And so you can't see anything, but it does have size, so no surface, but it has a size. So this would be different, though. This is just not even one-dimensional, this is zero-dimensional point. And this is, like I've said, this is not, I'm not just giving you great sounding opinions from the 700 AD today. This is stuff that's thoroughly argued for elsewhere. Sorry?
It's like quantum, like electrodynamics.
Yep. It's exactly like quantum chromodynamics, quantum electro. You know, when you've got, you don't have continuous fields stretching between particles. You've got particle exchanges of point particles. So unconnected, unattached streams of particles. That's fundamental to why Buddhist atomism and quantum reality are indistinguishable. And you mentioned the word in the introduction, things are connected. I've got something to say about that also, because I just said unattached, but I'll clarify about that in a little bit. Okay, so one thing that I'm not going to go into today, well, the reason why is because nobody really understands this. These are two ways of looking at one thing. Okay, if you look at an elephant, to use something that's often, an example that's often used in India. If you look at an elephant, if blindfolded men look at an elephant, touch an elephant, one will touch the trunk and another will touch the leg, and they're describing the same thing in vastly different ways. That's essentially what's going on right here. These two, really there's only one realm, but as far as I know, no Buddhist has ever figured out, no quantum physicist has ever figured out how these two realms can be identical. This is like, to say that means the following. It means that you are identical to all Buddhist atoms that construct reality now. And if you don't know it, that's fine. That's just your problem. It doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that you don't see this. And if you just merely practiced mindfulness meditation, perhaps you would. As far as I understand, though, how these can be identical is a mystery. It's actually something I'm working on right now in other research. So I won't go into that in detail, but you should remember that I'm going to discuss these as separate all throughout, whatever time we have left. But you should remember that really they're not separate. I'm just discussing them separately because we don't have like the grand unified theory of quantum Buddhism, which is needed. That theory would be to explain thoroughly number 2, which is what I'm going to do, I hope, in an article next year, which is nearing completion, and then show how 2 is 1. So in other words, to show how division 1 is div 2. Okay. To explain thoroughly number 2, which is what I'm going to do, I hope, in an article next year, which is nearing completion, and then show how 2 is 1. So in other words, to show how division 1 is div 2. Okay.
Complementarity, is that a mirror of this, the complementarity with the physicists?
Yeah, but complementarity makes me very nervous. I mean, I love Niels Bohr. He's my favorite physicist. But complementarity is not something that I've wanted to draw into my work at all, just because the theory in itself makes me too nervous. I've taken all kinds of other aspects of Bohr's work into publications of mine, especially his sort of positivistic interpretation of quantum physics, but not complementarity. But yeah, there are similarities, definitely. Okay. So I'm glad I have all these diagrams because it's better than reading all this. Okay, so I can sum up, those of you who are lost or would like a recap, this diagram here not only can sum everything up for us that I've just said, so far that is, but it also can sort of be a jumping point to everything that really gets interesting about this. So division 1, what it says, what makes up what we see is, well, that's fine, that's no big deal. I'll just leave it there. So division 1 is composed, this is the Buddhist atoms. Division 2 are, we would usually say, empirical reality, planets and animals and so forth, but from what I've just said, the Buddhist position is this is all the constructions of consciousness. Empirical reality is a construction of consciousness. So it's interesting to note, watch how, so we're labeling here division 1 what it's like, and division 2 what it's like. Notice the properties. Division 1 is composed of invisible items. Look at here. Visible items can be perceived via sense organs. Division 1 is composed of immaterial items, and I'll explain why soon. Division 2 is the domain of the material. This right here we call this material stuff. It's just the name we've given to it. So division 1, Buddhist atoms are partless. Everything in this domain has a part, is composite, or is a mereological item, is the technical word philosophers use for it. Over here, items are surfaceless. Here, they have surfaces. Here, the Buddhist atoms are timeless, or very nearly timeless. Actually, timeless is the word I'm going to stick with today. Over here, items we believe exist in time. They persist. Over here, items are uncaused. One of the key, just revolutionary discoveries of quantum physics, which was known to the Buddhists, well, at least some of the Buddhists, way back. Actually, my article called The Our Theory of Time that I published last year, the whole point of that article is to show that the only correct interpretation of Buddhist atomism is to show that Buddhist atoms are utterly uncaused. Just very similar to the way in quantum particle dynamics, there is probabilistic causation, which I just translate as being randomness, or a non-causality. Anyway, so over here, Buddhist atoms are motionless. These all go together. If something is timeless, you can't move through time, so it's motionless. Over here, items are caused to exist and have motion. Over here, Buddhist atoms don't touch each other. Over here, these items touch. These atoms touch here because they have surfaces. Surface items don't have anything by which to touch each other by, since we need surfaces to touch. So there's no touching over here, which gets to your connectedness point, which we'll get to. And typically, the Buddhist atoms are believed, electrons and so forth, are believed to compose this stuff. Okay, so now here's the point. There are some problems here. You should notice. How exactly is an immaterial reality? If this is the case, if the level of the basic building blocks, quantum Buddhist atoms, compose everything, that's like saying that immaterial stuff composes material stuff. How does that work? That seems to be a problem. Oh, but it gets worse. Let's just interpret the diagram here. Here's what I've got written for you to interpret. This is what we are asked to believe by any physicist, philosopher, anybody who wants to tell us that the reality that we see is largely as we see it, and it is composed of a quantum reality. Then this is what follows. Then we say back to him or her, then you live in a causal world that is composed of non-causal items. That doesn't sound too kosher. You live in a world of surfaces and colors. Look around you, all you see are surfaces and colors. Every single experience about your outer world can be reduced to surfaces and colors, even things like heat and sound and so forth. That's another issue, though, which I've discussed elsewhere. So the world of surfaces and colors that you find yourself in is composed of a world that is colorless and surfaceless. That's a huge problem. Does anybody know how long that's been known? This is not me just discussing. Pardon? How long? This is Zeno, one of Zeno's paradoxes. The measure paradox. What was Zeno? 450, 550. So he's way back in the BCs in Greece. Here's what the mathematical equation would look like. If surfaceless things compose surfaces, this is what the mathematical equation would look like. So S equals surface, so no surface. All of you have had third grade math, so this should be a pretty easy equation. Zero surface plus zero surface plus zero surface plus zero surface equals a greater than zero surface. That seems to be a mathematical disaster. How can a bunch of zeros, all of a sudden lead us to non-zero? There's only one philosopher I know of who's ever had a serious attempt to try to show us how this can be. His name is Adolf Grunbaum, who still works at the University of Pittsburgh, and in some famous papers in 1952, 1956, and so forth, he allegedly solved this and showed that, miraculously, this isn't a problem. However, in 4 publications of mine from 2003 to 2005, and one coming out later this year, I've shown that his solution apparently does not work, which should not be a surprise. because we all know that this would appear to be a simple equation. Okay? If you study binary mathematics, maybe there's some loopholes. But then again, it seems our trust in this equation being an absurdity. This equal sign right here needs to go away. There is no equal sign. So that's what the diagram results in. And that's what... So there's a problem. Let me just keep going with this and then we'll keep moving here. So also other things that the diagram shows are you live in a material world that is composed of immaterial items, as I've seen. You live in a visible world composed of invisible items. You live in a world of persisting items that are composed of momentary and truly fleeting, non-persisting items. And so this last point is kind of like this. If you look at a lion, just use an example from an article I have coming out. If you look at a lion from a distance, so you can't see its, the little fine pieces of its fur and so forth. So the back of the lion is going to look like a gold smooth piece of lion. So just imagine that lion, sitting in the zoo or Africa or whatever, and you're not going to see the lion flipping in and out of existence. It's going to appear to you that smooth patch of golden fur just continues to exist through time. So you see it now, and then at another moment, and so forth. So what's the problem? They just persist through time. The problem is that the reality that makes up the lion does not persist through time. It persists through, if the Buddhist atoms that make it up, allegedly make it up, have any persistence at all, it's going to be, trillionths of a second or less. So there's a huge problem with how our sense experience matches up with Buddhist Atomism and quantum reality. Okay, so let me continue on here then. Yes. I'm told a lot of people are hearing us now, so.
Okay, I was just wondering, the 5 points that you had there, I have a pretty good grasp on what they all mean, but the use of the term material throws me off a bit. I mean, even if they are fundamental, basic building blocks, to say that something at that point is immaterial,
right. Okay.
I mean, what is the description?
I'm going to cover that, but
material.
I'm going to do that right now. If you just go and look, it's merely a definition issue, a word issue, semantic issue. If you go and look at the history of the definition of matter, matter is defined in the following ways. Just start describing the wall. It's got a surface. In other words, an extension. It is stable. It's not flipping in and out of existence. It is colorful. It has a location in space. It's solid, and so forth. Though if that's what matter is, then there's a problem, because this stuff doesn't have any of those qualities. It has the opposite. So if matter is solid, stable, extended, located in space, persists through time, if something has the inverse of all those properties, I have to call it non-matter. You see what I mean?
So I have another question then. Would you define the materialistic point of view? In other words, if I looked at that materialistically, what would that mean?
There's no... the only reason I call this immaterial, and this is not my choice. This is a movement that some physicists and philosophers are onto, to say that subatomic particles Buddhist atoms we don't see how they're material items. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They have the inverse properties of the material items, so how can we call them material? If there's an apple sitting over there, and it's red and round and tastes like an apple, those are three properties. If an orange is sitting next to it, and it's orange and has a different roundness and doesn't taste apple-like, I can't call it an apple. Its properties being different mean I have to call it a different thing. So if something has all the properties that matter doesn't have, I don't know how I have to call it non-matter. That would seem to be the definition of immaterial.
What would you think of suggesting that is immaterial which has no substrate?
You mean in the philosophic sense of Aristotle and so forth?
I don't know about Aristotle. I was meaning in the physical sense that what we would associate with being material would be that it is upon something, within something. It has a substrate.
Yeah,
but you're suggesting that, I think, that this has no substrate.
When you use the word substrate, that has a specific, I think that you're using it the same way as I'm thinking. That's a specific meaning to philosophers, meaning that there is, behind the properties, is a property holder.
Something that reveals the properties.
Yeah. That is, Buddhist Atomism is part of a tradition across the world. He goes from anywhere from William James to the logical positivists to the philosopher Quine, all over the place, where we reject substrate because of its metaphysicality. What I mean by that is we have no evidence that substrate exists. It just seems to be that we come into the world, a world of properties, whiteness, solid, so forth. And therefore, the way we think makes us say, okay, if there's a property of something, then there has to be a something that we don't see, an invisible something. That's the substrate. It's often called a bare particular, a thin particular. There's all kinds of names philosophers, metaphysicians have. The philosophers who study metaphysics have for these. But I'm part of a tradition that rejects this, and I don't reject this just by choice. I published several articles that are savage attacks against the philosophy of property possession. The best one is the one that's coming out later this year in the journal called Sorites, called Blob Theory. So to answer your question in a real quick summary, there's two reasons. We have no evidence that substrate exists, but let's just say, who cares? Let's just theorize that it does. There's this stuff behind the properties that holds the properties. If you start to try to describe it, you run straight into what philosophers often call is a train wreck.
How about just using difference then?
Difference?
Yeah.
Difference is exactly...
Where there's no difference, there's
no
materiality.
Difference. Say again?
Where there is no difference, there is what we would call immateriality.
Oh, well, there is no difference, there is immateriality. You would have to then explain how, what you have as being not difference, do you have in mind it persists through time? For example? The point I'm trying to get is, as soon as you try to describe it as existing through time, for example, or entering into causal relations if it does, or being eternal, I could show you if we had time that it leads to big problems. In other words, the descriptions lead to absurdity. And that's not just my opinion, again, this is what I've shown elsewhere and anything I've written.
I'm just thinking, one thing, I was talking to several people with the string theory, which, it just kind of interests me on the side, but as far as I understand with the strings, there is no connection between the strings. So if we took ultimately, let's take that picture. So there is no connection between the strings. And there may be, I don't know about temporal evolution, if there's a connection. So if we think that there's no connection, which is this picture, I guess, which is interesting because I mentioned connection at the beginning, which I think, but at the other level, no connection. So no connection is pretty good because in that sense, the surface is a manifestation and an assumption of connection.
Actually, that's something I'm going to go into here in a second. But just to give you a hint, the idea of connection is really sort of, in the Buddhist tradition I'm thinking of, is sort of replaced by the concept of indistinguishability. Any Buddhist atom is indistinguishable from any other. So if you see one here and one there, they're indistinguishable. Of course, any...
Pauli exclusion principle for a Buddhist atom.
Pardon?
There's no like Pauli exclusion principle that, let's say, electrons in an atom.
I forgot what that is.
Well, they can't adopt exactly the same set of quantum numbers.
Oh.
Set energy level quantum numbers. So
Yeah, that would be
identical.
that would be rejected in Buddhist atomism. But I mean, just as we also have, as far as I can tell, there's confusion in quantum physics about exactly what to do about electrons. They seem to be more or less identical, except for certain issues like as location, for example. But location depends on the existence of space, which is invisible. There's not a person in here that's ever seen space. So, it's
What an electron is ultimately, though.
right. Yeah, our best theory for what these things are is Buddhist atomism. But yeah, as far as the Pauli exclusion principle, yeah, something like that would be rejected. There is, these two statements would both be true in Buddhist atomism. There's only one atom, and there are infinite instances of atoms which are all indistinguishable. So both of those would be. So the real mystery in Buddhist atomism is if there's this sea of Buddhist atoms, what do they do? And how can they give rise to the appearance of the reality we see? I've made some preliminary work on that, but that's what I'm working on right now. Anybody else? Yeah.
You used the example of quarks and electrons as being examples of Buddhist atoms.
Yeah. Right.
But an electron has mass, so wouldn't the fact that it has mass, some measurable mass that physicists, scientists can measure,
Well, that it has mass is okay.
But in terms of it being related to having some material, it could be semantics again. I'm just tripping on this semantic argument of this.
That was a great question.
Immateriality. Like if something has mass or can generate momentum, for example.
As far as, let me explain this. This is a really good question. You're making me think of several things here. First of all, I'm saying that the Buddhist atoms are electrons and quarks and so forth. That is not proven. If we find a quark has a part, then what that means is that a Buddhist atomist like myself would just change their mind and say, well, nope. That may sound funny, but that's of course the virtue of scientific thought, is that the pursuit is to change your mind, not to have stagnant, thoughts through. The whole idea is to overturn your own theory. Progress. So that's one thing. A second thing is, though, as far as electron having mass, great. That's a great point. I know that intro physics students are told, the electron has mass and it has a little radius. Virtually almost everything I've said here is contradicted in your intro physics book. That's not my problem. That's the problem of the intro physics professors. They are not describing particles correctly. They're describing particles in a way that's not going to throw everybody into philosophic discussion, so you can just train the engineers to know about the basics of physics. But as far as an electron having mass, to me that question makes only so much sense. I mean, is mass just a kind of movement? Is mass just the interaction an electron has with a Higgs particle? Or is mass just some sort of property that is intrinsic to what an electron is? If it's... to be honest, I reject all three of those. And I say that the mass... I'm not saying this because it's fun to give my opinion. This is something I've thoroughly argued elsewhere. What mass is our human way of constructing ideas about what structureless Buddhist atoms are. So we see it, through our computer or through Buddhist meditation. And we describe it in certain ways with language, but language always misses the mark. As soon as you, like Zen masters often say, as soon as you say something, you're wrong. Well, it's a very famous Buddhist maxim. That would be the best way I could say here. So if you, for example, if you said, flashing piece of light, that's as close as we can get to a description, but ultimately Buddhist atoms are ineffable, beyond language. And that's actually the focus of the article I mentioned earlier that I've got coming out later. All my work is summed up in one article coming out, two, but really one article coming out later this year in Axiomath. It's called Mereological Nihilism. So I discussed that thoroughly. If there's something that is described in terms of language, it leads to contradiction. The only things that exist are those which are ineffable and only can be experienced through feeling, which is exactly what Buddhists have been saying for centuries. So, just to bring up, what I think is a great example, why didn't, in Star Wars movies, of course, Lucas was onto a lot of this kind of stuff when he made the Star Wars movies, why didn't he say, we have all these quotes of Yoda saying, feel the Force, Ben saying to Luke, feel the Force. Why didn't they say, think about the Force? Or, talk about the Force? Because it's only known through feeling.
That feeling, that is not an organ feeling. It's not through the eyes or touch. That is
exactly.
It's not through the mind either.
It's not a brain activity. It's not a nervous system activity. Nervous systems don't exist, according to Buddhist Atomism. None of this stuff. The reality you see is somehow or another. It's either completely, your senses are either completely wrong, or they're way off track in some way. I'm not saying that you don't exist right there. That's not what I'm saying. But it very well could be the case that that's true.
In the flashing of unconnected, flashes of energy, unconnected. So is that feeling coherent?
Yes. I'm actually going. That actually is the next topic here. Let me give you a quote from the article I've mentioned now several times. Very excited about this article coming out. I might have worked on it since 1999. Here's basically what I say in the aforementioned article. We've all been told that reality is coherent. That the empirical reality is explainable in terms of coherent science, and if we find a problem, the problem's with us. Okay, I think there's even an X-Files quote, one of my favorite shows, where Scully says to Mulder, she says, science is not in contradiction, it's humans' mistaken thoughts that are in contradiction about science. Buddhist Atomism says this, nothing could be further from the truth. That empirical reality, which we're calling Div 2, all this stuff up here, glad I drew this diagram, all this stuff up here, is describable by contradiction only, and is all only given in terms of absurdity. So postmodernists are going to be very happy with Buddhist Atomism. I've had postmodernists tell me that they are very fond of this theory. So great. But it's of course a scientific, has a scientific basis for it, but I do like that postmodernists have jumped on the bandwagon a little bit. Only a few that have emailed me. So division 1 is describable in terms of non-contradiction, if it's describable at all, because it's really technically ineffable. But if you try to construct a definition of it, very minimal description of it, it's going to be consistent. Now you should notice something. What I just said is completely opposite of what is typically mentioned by scientists everywhere. What do scientists tell you about waves and particles, about uncertainties, and so forth? We are told by scientists everywhere that quantum reality involves paradox. Wave-particle duality. Who's heard of wave-particle duality? Okay, well good. It's not like my classes where one person raises their hand. Wave-particle duality, I argue in the article coming out, doesn't exist. There is no wave. There is a movement in physics that's been generated by some loudmouth physicists. Feynman, a great example. Richard Feynman. He bitterly hated philosophers. If you doubt it, just go read anything he's written, and it'll, a couple sentences in, he'll start ripping on philosophers. He and others have been largely responsible for telling us, without argument, that all of a sudden, reality just has all these paradoxes, and they're irreducible, and we can't go into them, we can't explore them. And oh, by the way, Professor Feynman, when he was still alive, would tell us, or would demonstrate for us, if you question me on that, if you challenge my assertion, unargued for assertion, that this reality involves irreducible paradox, I'm going to laugh at you, mock you, and I'm going to use my platform as a famous physicist and announce to the whole world that you philosophers are idiots. Okay? This is very mysterious for tons of reasons. One thing is that in all these other areas of science, that philosophy doesn't exist. The philosophy, which I just said is wrong, but the assumption is made that reality is coherent. So why all of a sudden here do a couple of physicists tell us that reality is incoherent? It's a political scandal, is what it is. The only reason we have the paradoxes of quantum reality, wave-particle duality, stretched out smeared electrons through uncertainty, is due to metaphysics. Metaphysics is, you can define as non-scientific theorization about invisible things, things that are beyond our experience. When you have a metaphysics where you describe things beyond your experience, you can say anything you want. You can say, God is a man in the sky. I can't see him, and neither can you. I'll accept him through very special circumstances, but he's there. And if you don't believe me, I could cut off your hands or start war or something. Of course, I'm referring to history, partially. Some things going on in Iraq make this... anyway, we'll get to that later. So this is very mysterious. If you want more information about what I've just said about how the quantum paradoxes, the summary is the quantum paradoxes only derive through physicists, just a few, but actually a few famous ones, inserting metaphysics, non-scientific information, into their theories and just coming up with these paradoxes. All physicists see are particles. The only empirical thing that they get in their research looks like, where's that film? Well, it's the one I showed you a little while ago, where the lines were going like this. The idea that there are probability waves, probability clouds. Nobody's ever seen these. Yes, computers will generate a probability cloud, but that's through doing, that's the computer's representation of generating particle activities.